I'm not very thirsty. How about that?
Okay, I want to welcome everyone to the special joint meeting of the City Council and the Murfreesboro Electric Department Power Board. It's June 11th, 2015 at 5 o'clock. So I'm going to call the City Council to order and then pass it over to Vice Chairman Scales. All right. I guess we'll need to call the Power Board to order.
The Power Board, the Murfreesboro Electric Department Power Board will now come to order. I'm going to read who's present. Mr. Shane McFarland.
Here.
Robert Scales, Jr., yes. Mr. Richard Stone.
Here.
Mr. Rick Hardesty.
Here.
Jean Ann Rogers. Mr. Steve Sachs, General Manager.
Present.
Okay. And Chairman Rogers, say Chairman Dr. Rogers.
Yes.
Her middle child is graduating college this weekend, so she could not be here, but definitely sends her regrets. I guess I want to talk about sort of the reason why we're here tonight. The City Council on Thursday night voted to retain outside legal counsel and also to look at a valuation firm for why we're here. And I really would like to go into the process. I know there's been different comments and maybe rumors that have been flying around, and we've met with Steve on numerous occasions, or Mr. Sachs. But Mr. Lyons, and if I miss something, you can tell me. But 6 or 8 weeks ago, Middle Tennessee Electric approached to say, are you or would the city be interested in talking about a merger? And to give you some feedback and some information, we are approached weekly with deals about people who are coming into the city. So it's not really the point of the mayor or the city manager to say, well, yeah, I'm for that or against that. We say, well, yeah, we'll listen. So met with Middle Tennessee Electric a couple of times, and once I saw that it got more formal, I didn't feel comfortable having those conversations anymore, and I don't think Mr. Lyons did either. And we said, put it in writing. And then that's where the memorandum of understanding came, and that came on Friday, the
May 28th.
May 28th. There's been some comments about why would the mayor sign a memorandum of understanding, but I signed an acknowledgement of a memorandum of understanding that I received the memorandum. And so immediately when we received that memorandum, Mr. Lyons prepared a letter to the MED employees, also to the City Council and to the Power Board, and that immediately went to the Power Board in the City Council. So there has been no under-the-table dealings. There's been no outside negotiations. It's been something that's going to be a fair and transparent process, and that's why we're here. That was immediately brought to the City Council and then to the City Attorney, who has been studying and where we are and what process we need to go. And so by no means is this a done deal, and wanted to relay that to the Power Board. We're here to study what opportunities we have, not only for our city residents, but for our ratepayers with this opportunity. And so, Mr. Lyons, is there anything else I'm missing on that?
Yeah, no, Mayor, I think that's an excellent introduction. And while we've shared, all of the information with the Power Board and the MED employees, I might add, I thought it might be helpful just to go over maybe some of the points in the memorandum of understanding, just so that everybody's on the same page. And since we're at the start line, it might be helpful to just talk those out.
And Mr. Lyons, I think it would be a point to say, because I see many MED employees that are sitting out there, the first thing that we said when this was happening, the first question was, what does this do for our employees? That was the very first question. And so that's why you'll see the transparency in every discussion we've had, even as a city council, is what does this do for our employees? So I wanted to make sure and say that from the very get-go.
Yeah, and just to add to what the mayor just said, obviously this news was unexpected to the MED employees. And before any press release was sent out, we wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity for the city to advise the MED employees so that they heard about it from the city and not read about it in the paper or hear it on the radio. So we were very intentional to make sure the MOU came to us. We did not go looking for it, but once it came to us, and there was the thought that we needed to take a fair and objective look at it, we want to make sure the employees heard it first from us. Knew it was unexpected. We didn't have necessarily control of that, but wanted to make sure that they had the information. So let me maybe go over some of the points in the MOU, because I think that really kind of sets some of the foundational elements as we would begin to take a look at this. The MOU that was sent to us from President Chris Jones had 10 points in it. Number one, the parties will negotiate in good faith. Number two, Middle Tennessee's electric rates and customer service will be comparable. Number three, MED customers would become member owners of the co-op. Number four, MED employees will be offered employment at least at their current compensation. Again, that was a clear point from the all of the meetings that the MED employees had to be taken care of. So that is a deal point here. Number five, MED's pension assets will be protected. Number six, Murfreesboro will have the opportunity to retain properties at its choosing. For instance, if we wanted to retain ownership of the building downtown on Walnut, that would be an option if we decided that's what we wanted to do. Number seven, the acquisition cost will represent fair market value as determined through good faith negotiations, but not less than $150 million. Number eight, the MOU is subject to the approval of Middle Tennessee Electric and Murfreesboro. Number nine, the MOU is a basis for discussions but does not address all essential terms of the transaction. And number nine, I think, is very important. This MOU wasn't a sale for contract. It was, we're going to have an understanding that we're going to take a look at this and study this, but it never was intended to deal with all of the deal points that a potential sale and a contract would entail. And number 10, both parties can terminate negotiations at any time without penalty. So those were the items that were in the MOU. When we presented this to City Council, we realized the city attorney is getting ready to retire. This certainly would be a complex transaction. And last week, the City Council approved a outside counsel in the firm of Bradley, Arant, Bolton, Cummings. Mr. Tom Trent is someone who's familiar to the city. So the city has engaged Mr. Trent in a transaction like this. We would need to determine what is the value of MED's system. There's two firms that we've reached out to. We haven't gotten any information back about their services, about how they would go about looking at that. But in looking at other transactions like this, it doesn't happen very often. But electric departments have been merged or bought. One of the studies I found looked at several different approaches to it. So let me just kind of talk through some of those. This isn't necessarily how we'll do it. I'm just trying to give everyone a sense for what a study like this potentially could include. In developing the opinion of value, they looked at replacement cost less depreciation, income and comparable sales. And in the valuation approach, considerations and adjustments are made and typically considered and performed in the determination of fair market value. They'll look at weighing different aspects of the system, whether it's replacement cost or income or comparable sales. But these are the sorts of things that need to get measured: the value of land, structures, improvement, poles, conduit, station equipment, conductors, transformers, meters, streetlights, tools, shop equipment, communication equipment, vehicles, office furniture, technology, and more. Obviously, a lot of work that would need to be done. Mr. Minot and his team, certainly have inventories of assets, but how that would be valued really is going to require some outside help. So kind of the next group that the city would seek to partner would be someone to help us with that sort of valuation. That does require some time. And the two firms that I've reached out to haven't responded back with a proposal, but once we get that, staff takes a look at it, I would expect to be coming back to the City Council shortly to make a recommendation on who we would partner with. So because the Power Board hadn't had a chance to meet since the MOU, was delivered to us, we felt this was a good opportunity to get everybody in the same room. The mayor and I, in our conversations with Mr. Sachs, have emphasized the importance of communication and transparency. This is a very significant, potentially a very significant transaction, and it needs to be done the right way. It needs to be done transparently, and we're going to need input from the Power Board, input from the MED employees, input from the ratepayers, as we would consider, all elements before a decision could be made whether or not this is the right direction to take. So those opportunities to provide input would be many and ongoing. As I mentioned, we don't have a timeline for this yet. We need to get some more information from evaluation firm to really sit down and take a look at how long something like this would take. But clearly months, and not ready to put an estimate on that, but it'll take a good while for all that to be analyzed. So, Mayor, I'm not sure if there was anything else you might want me to add in terms of an overview, but I think the message that you sent at the very beginning is this is the very first step to begin a thorough study. We can't say at this point whether it's a good deal or not, but it's one that we thought was worthy to study. We mentioned it to Mr. Sachs. We certainly understand the uncertainty to the MED employees. That's real, and it needs to be treated very significantly. And so to the extent we can provide information as this moves down the road, I think is going to be absolutely critical, because I know that's got to be weighing on them, and we have to treat it the right way.
And really wanted to, as we've got the Power Board here and the City Council here, if there are any questions that you have, and really serving dual roles for me, being on the Power Board and the City Council, being the City Council representative, if there's any, any concerns or any comments. Really what the City Council, and I'd like to hear your input, we have done is said we don't know whether it's a good deal or a bad deal, but we feel like we have the opportunity, and we also feel like we have the obligation to study whether it's a good deal or a bad deal. And that's what we really want to talk with, I guess, is gauge the opinion of the Power Board as well.
I guess I'll start off. I was hoping we could have at least a discussion of our expectations, how we're going to go about this, what we expect from this, what questions we might have. So as we walk together through this, we'll answer all the questions in the process and not come back 6 months from now or sometime later and then realize, oh, we missed a very big thing, and we start the process again. So is that a fair way to get started, to just maybe go around between the Power Board and the council and just see what their expectations may be?
Sure. Sure, Ms.
I have a
Kelsey.
couple of questions. Just comments from the public and some questions that personally I was interested in. One of the questions has already been answered, Mr. Lyons. A lot of the employees are telling me from Middle Tennessee Electric that they are being told by their management it's a done deal. So you have clarified that, and that's good to squish that rumor. Another thing you mentioned, offer employment at least at their, for the MED people, offer employment at least at their present compensation. A question I have is, what about the positions that MED has that Middle Tennessee Electric doesn't have? What does that mean for those employees transitioning over? And the outcome, it has to be good for, as we negotiate, it has to be good for the city of Murfreesboro, it has to be good for Middle Tennessee Electric, and it also, a big part of the pitch, it has to be fair to the employees and our rate payers. That's a big concern. Another concern is we have two companies right now that it's a known fact that, excuse me, is independently operating very fine. So who's to benefit, if anybody, from this merger? And in that same line, then why, if everybody's independently surviving very good, why do it? We've already voted to hire a consultant for outside help, and I'm sure, I guess, I don't know, are we going to tell them some of the things specifically that we're looking for? And if so, is Murfreesboro Electric, would they be able to hire a consultant also? And will they be able to give their ABCs? And sometimes when we hire consultants and we tell them what we're looking for, I've seen in studies, it shows that whatever they're looking for is what the consultants are going to find in their favor. So I'm just, just wanting that process to be clear also. We need to look at the benefits on both sides. But here again, more important than anything, we need to look at the benefits to our taxpayers. We need to seriously look at the pluses and the minuses on both sides. But with that, we have 3 entities involved. We're talking about Middle Tennessee Electric and Murfreesboro Electric, but we do have the 3rd entity that I'm not hearing much about, and that's our taxpayers. And I guess what I'm saying is what all this boils down to, and looking at the pluses and the minuses, as council members, we need to weigh heavily, very heavily, on the best decision for our taxpayers.
And employees.
And employees. Oh, yeah, definitely employees. That's why I started off by asking, what about some of the employees, the positions that the Middle Tennessee has, that MED has. And just in talking to people, and they're talking to me, they're saying Murfreesboro Electric, and I don't know anything about this, they are much more advanced in a lot of things than Middle Tennessee Electric. So, and for instance, if you have a comptroller from Murfreesboro Electric, would they go over to the other company being the same thing? That's a concern we have. Like, you're invited to my house. Well, you can come in with the transition, but eventually you're going to go by my rules. So the transition of some people, their jobs may not have jobs because the other company doesn't have those positions.
I've got a question. You guys are okay
Sure.
with me? Would be, I don't know if this is the right time to ask it, but is there some, can we get some clarification on the ownership structures of both organizations? I mean, from a standpoint of the MTMC, my understanding is that the customer actually owns that as a co-op. In our system and the MED system, exactly what would the hierarchy be? I mean, is ultimately the taxpayer the owner?
Yes. MED is the MED is a department of the city. Its assets are city assets, and it's the corporate entity rather than the taxpayer. I mean, the citizens, are the city, but it's
Yeah.
the municipal corporation that is the owner.
I'm just trying to get a handle on just kind of some bigger picture stuff now. We don't really have any details, but from a bigger, from a higher perspective, trying to think, okay, so I live in the city. Currently I'm sort of a de facto owner of the department of the city, kind of, sort of, because I'm a taxpayer and I'm part of that group. I would also be an owner, but in a different way, of the EMTEMC through being a client of the utility. Is there any real difference that would matter? I guess this is the best question anybody can answer that. Is just as me personally, not as a city council, just me as a homeowner. Anybody know?
I really don't feel comfortable speaking for Middle Tennessee. I haven't ever been a co-op customer, and I don't know all the rights and privileges
All right.
that entails.
Okay.
You know, one thing is, as I understand it, you know, they select their board. The Middle Tennessee MED's ratepayers, citizens of Murfreesboro, don't select the MED board.
Yeah.
And so I mean, there are probably other aspects that are different, but
Right.
that may or may not be the most important element of difference. But analysis of what the structures and benefits are.
Yeah,
You
maybe
said
at
you
this-
wanted clarification on. I think
Maybe at this point we
identifying
just-
the issue is all we can probably do
Yeah,
tonight.
maybe at this point, we'll just get that as one of those factors maybe we can discuss as we go, that if we do identify that there are some of those things, we would be made aware of those, so we would have a good understanding of it.
Rob, who would the council look to answer the questions, the many questions, the list that we've already started asking? And would I have the opportunity to ask MED, excuse me, you all, Richard, those same questions?
Can I speak along that same vein? So I'm the newest to the Power Board, excluding the mayor.
Second newest.
Second newest. But I'll say I've been on approximately 9 months now. 10 months ago, I'll oversimplify this a little bit, but 10 months ago, I thought if I turned the switch on and the lights came on,
Everything was fine.
everything was fine. But in the last 9 months, I have learned a tremendous amount of what goes on to make that happen. So we're appointed by the city manager, and I believe that's discussed with city council in that appointment. And through that, I represent, I believe, on the Power Board, the city council, as well as I feel the ratepayers and the community. So my question is as we sit here, is from a legal perspective, or even from the city council's perspective, what is our role? I know what our role is as board members from the operational side of the utility. What is our role through this process, and what does what would the council like as far as asking us questions and input? But what do you see as the council, or Susan legally, what is our role in this process?
Well, obviously, you know, the ongoing operations remain the responsibility of the MED board. You know, that doesn't change just because the MOU has been presented by, you know, Middle Tennessee. I think what the mayor outlined, or the city manager, is the expectation that it would take the board and the council and the staffs of both the city and the electric department to develop the issues and do the research and, you know, take it from just the MOU proposal to these are the things that we have to collectively be concerned about, and you know, negotiate in good faith with Middle Tennessee. So being part of the process is what I expect would be the case. Now, it is obvious to everyone that I have served as the legal counsel to MED as well as to the city, and I don't believe that that would be a technical conflict of interest, because it's always been clear. It's been in my role as the city attorney. I've been providing legal advice to MED. But you know, I don't want to put any limits on what the MED board could do. I think, you know, the responsibility of the board is to, you know, be involved in the process. You know, and raise the issues that affect the operations of the utility, raise the issues that affect the well-being of the employees, raise the, is this going to be better long-term for reliability of the system, to deal with the issues that are facing electric utilities nationwide, to be part of the larger organization or not, you know, to take the expertise that you have as Power Board members, because you're the subject matter experts as compared to the city council on this, and, you know, directing staff of MED appropriately to surface the issues and help resolve them as part of the negotiation process. I don't know if that's responsive to your question, but I think that that's a very important role.
I have another question. Speaking of boards, if this does happen, how many, if any, MED board members would be now a part of the new board? And how is the number determined?
I think that's a great question.
Yeah, and this is the kind of question and identification of issues is exactly what needs to start in a meeting like this and continue as the process continues. So if we think about having the two different consultants, let's take the valuation one first because that one's a little bit more straightforward. That's going to be a professional evaluation of how much is all of the assets of MED worth, including their customer base and income. That's a calculation to come up with a number. Just like you have in any contract, there's a purchase price. The purchase price needs to be set at a level that is going to be acceptable to both sides, that is defensible, and we can document. So the valuation piece is pretty straightforward. Mr. Trent, the attorney, would work with the city and the Power Board to take a look at some of the questions that have been asked by Mr. LaLance and Ms. Scales-Harris and Mr. Scales and the others to say, these are the deal points. Now, how are we going to address those? How are we going to deal with board representation, for instance? We would like X. And then Middle Tennessee Electric's going to respond back, and we're going to see if we can come to some agreement. So all the sorts of questions that you all are asking are the things that would go over into a contract for sale, and that's where we need to get that, that input, and to do it transparently. This does not need to be done in the dark. We need to be very clear and open and transparent about it. So you take a summary, and it'll take a while to work through what are all those issues and what do we want to see from the city's side of things to put in the MOU to see how Middle Tennessee Electric reacts to it. So that's the conversation that would occur in the coming months, is to say, what are these issues? How do we want to address it? And how do we see if we can find an agreement or say it's not going to work and walk away?
Does the process require review and approval from the MED board, or is the deal going to come directly to the council?
Well, the material that was shared with you represents my initial research. It was begun on the Monday after we got the MOU on Friday, and I needed to give a quick answer by Thursday night. And it was not possible to look at more than 70 years worth of documents in that period of time. But I think I identified the key ones. And my initial conclusion was that this is not a simple issue because, as in the material that the board and the council have gotten, it appears that the city had charter authority to purchase and operate an electric system independent of a particular state law that was developed and adopted as part of the TVA's creation and creating municipal utilities all over the valley. It is also clear that there was not a referendum from the city voters to authorize the revenue bonds that were used to purchase the initial assets. And so this state law, which says you need to have the Power Board's approval, may not be applicable. But a number of years after the city purchased the assets and started having its own electric utility, it created the Power Board, and in that creation of the Power Board, it specifically referenced the Municipal Electric Plant Law of 1935, and in that law, as it now exists, it suggests that if you were acquiring assets under that law, you cannot sell substantially all of those assets without the approval of the board and a referendum. There have been a number of bond issues that have been issued since the initial bond issue, and what the impact of those bonds are on that provision of state law is unclear. The city of Memphis sought and got an opinion of the Attorney General that it was not subject to the requirement that there be a referendum based on the fact that it had acquired its electric system not using the Municipal Electric Plant Law of 1935, but relying on its charter power. So there is an argument that can be made that it is only the City Council whose approval is required. There is also another argument, which had been my initial impression before I started the work, that it would require approval of both the Power Board and a public referendum. That is a complex issue. It may require opinion of both bond counsel and or an attorney general's opinion. And so my expectation is that this will be something Mr. Trent and his colleagues will be looking at to see if they have a different opinion or to give advice about which path is appropriate.
So that's a maybe yes, maybe no.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of what I need is a one-handed economist. On the one hand, this. On the one hand, that. Well, this is there's justification both ways, and because it's an important issue, it warrants more time than the time I gave it. I feel I've identified the key pieces, and that the issue won't get that much simpler, but it is something which it was not possible to be absolutely definitively sure.
I think going back to Mr. Sachs's comment, I'm sure the council wants to make sure we're definitively sure so that 6 months after whatever decision is made, we don't look back and find ourselves in error.
I have another question. In situations like this, where does the state come in, if any?
The state wouldn't normally come in, to my knowledge. Now, I don't know about the regulation of cooperatives, but the state law that I mentioned does not have a role for the state in whether or not a city decides to sell substantially all of its electric plant. The power to sell all of the electric plant assets is in both the state law and in the city charter. The city doesn't need additional authority to do that. It would simply be the method that it uses to do that is what's unquestionable, not its power to do so. There's no state approval required before such a sale would take place, to my knowledge.
I think the question would be to ask the board what would be your expectations. The city council has I think made it clear that we want a very transparent process, and then also an educated process that we get information, and that's why we're looking at the consultants who are when I say the consultants, they're really not consultants. It's an accounting evaluation firm who looks and says this is what it's worth, and then also from the attorney, someone who has dealt with this before. So that was one of the things that we wanted to make sure is hire the best that we possibly can and make it a transparent process.
I think at the point we're at today, I would encourage the council to include the utility board in its scope of work in the banking business. I know there's many different ways to look at appraisals. Several were mentioned in the document that was sent out. However, I think there are some intangibles that the utility board does do for the city that wouldn't show up necessarily directly in the financials that the appraiser is going to look at. So PD is going to be a big part of that, making sure that those things are included, making sure that we look at the utility as an enterprise and what is its enterprise value, not just looking at historic income. The utility has approximately $189 million in PP&E right now. So, $189 million in tangible product is going to bring you a tangible value. Income approach, if you look at net operating income, cap rates, and those things, it's going to show you how much those tangible assets generate in income. But I don't want to lose sight of the continued income that comes from that. I just think that the utility board, Mr. Scales, I may be speaking on your behalf, I would encourage the council to include the board in some of those things that 10 months ago I didn't know about that I know exist today.
Mr. Lyons, we really want to have a consultant from MED's perspective in this process. So when you talk to Mr. Chris Jones, right, that's a concern.
As you can imagine, when this became public on that Friday, between then and now, I've been asked several times from people who know I'm on the board, what do you think? I don't know what I think. As we mentioned earlier, this is brand new. We don't have information to formulate an opinion at this time. I do think we need to look at the legal perspectives, and I thank you for that information. And from the mayor and from Mr. Lyons, I trust and appreciate your assurances of transparency. These are people's livelihoods. I have another job. My position on this board doesn't pay my bills. If it went away, I'm going to continue to live my life. I'm unaffected. But we have a lot of outstanding long-term employees, both inside and out, who have been very dedicated. In the years I've been on, they've put in a lot of hours. There's been a lot of upgrades, a lot of changes. They've been very loyal. They've been outstanding. Going back to the tornadoes, I think they've proven their worth, and I would hope that, and I appreciate the assurance that they would have a job at least at their current rate of pay and that their pension will be protected. That's my biggest concern. That concern may be different once we start getting information. I would appreciate the opportunity. Richard's background's banking, mine's baking, but through the years we have purchased several competitors, and we've been approached as a family operation with 5 plants. We've been approached several times and have gone through due diligence, understand what that is, understand that someone else's value and what my feeling is towards the value of our company are two totally different things. So I think that it's going to be imperative that we walk through it together, and it'll be determined whether the board has any input in the final decision or whether that's a decision the council can make on their own. But I appreciate a seat at the table, and I appreciate and trust both of you when you speak to your desire and your demand that this be transparent. So it's really hard to have a dialogue over whether it's good or bad because we don't have enough information to make that determination at this time.
Well, let me speak to a couple of points. I've had several people contact me already, and I've learned a whole lot, again, like y'all had said, in a very short period of time as to how this operates and some of the subtle questions that are behind the initial questions. It's easy to say we're going to take care of our ratepayers and we're going to take care of the employees, but the subtleties of how that is actually fleshed out is really going to be important that we move through that process and become educated ourselves. One question to be on the table for sure for me is, with this kind of purchase price that we're dealing with, and is there a differential between the rate being paid by Middle Tennessee Electric and Murfreesboro Electric customers? How are they going to make up that capital investment, that initial capital investment? Because is that going to be on the backs of our ratepayers at some point in time? That would be a consideration that I think has to be brought to the table. There is a difference in how they provide the service. Middle Tennessee Electric is over a large area and requires a different amperage, is it, or voltage?
But the power's the same.
So it's the same power, but it's provided at a different, Steve, you're going to have to help me here, but because I'm sure that's the issue, that they're two different services even though they provide electricity. So, how is that going to happen? Are we going to, that is going to be a capital investment beyond the purchase price. So how is that figure going to be raised? And I'm not saying that all this can't happen, but it's the subtle little details in the questions that we need to make sure we've chased those rabbits down those holes as far as we can, make sure we have definitive answers that protect the interests of the employees, not just that surface question and say, well, we assume it's going to be done. So what I was grateful for is that the memorandum of understanding does not have any term on it. Is that correct? It doesn't. There's not a term on it, so we're not under the gun to have something done or it's going to be taken off the table. The issue is we can take whatever time it needs to ask those questions. So I want to encourage everybody to continue to ask the questions and contact us and let us know what questions need to be asked. I don't think there's anybody sitting at this table that doesn't want to ask those questions and make sure that you feel that your particular point of view and your perspective has been brought to the table and answered. So, while we're going through this process, don't make your voice known and make your concerns known. Don't expect us to know everything or to have ask all the questions. There are people here that will ask the questions if you'll present them to us.
Well, and I think that's a great point because, and that's why we're here today, because there's not any one person that's sitting at this table that has all the answers, but there's also not one person that's sitting at this table that we have the ability to be able to say yes, it's a yes or a no. And I joke with people who, when I go out and speak, and they ask if you have if you have the power to be able to say who comes and doesn't come into the city. And I said, if I did, there'd be one contractor in this city. So we don't have the opportunity to be able to say whether it's a good deal or a bad deal without getting the information. And that's, I would tell Richard and Rick and Bob and Steve from being on the Power Board, we not only want the Power Board's input, I would think we would expect the Power Board's input from both sides because you are experts on what we deal with, and it's going to have to be a partnership as we work through. So I guess that goes to Ms. McGannon asking if the City Council has hired maybe a valuation firm. What I think would be a good idea that we have not hired evaluation firms, but they're going to be discussed that maybe that would go to the Power Board and we, or jointly with the Power Board, that we make that decision, the attorney, so that way we're keeping the Power Board involved. I think the one thing that we have to be careful with, and as we all have seen, there's been rumors that have gone around since this has come out. There's no diabolical plan, no hostile takeover. That's not been the case. It's something that we're going to talk about. But the thing that we have to be careful with is when we have individuals or that are speaking on behalf of the organization that may not, it needs to be one voice. So how do we handle when we talk about as a board, as a Power Board, who needs to be, as a point person? I think it's tough if you have different people maneuvering on different things. How do we want to handle that? Do we want to say that there's one point person that works between the Power Board and the city manager and the city council? Is that how we'd want to handle that? Or I think what we have to be careful with is that we don't have 7 voices from the Power Board or management that are going and pointing fingers. So I would make a suggestion on behalf of the Power Board. I think Richard is very capable on the financial end that and on the management end, that I would make the recommendation that Richard could, or Chairman Rogers, if you miss a meeting, you get appointed to be on a committee. So, but
liaison or some sort.
I think, and liaison in between the city council and the city manager. But
I will allow our vice chair to speak to that, but I'm happy to do whatever council and Mr. Scales would have us do.
I guess I've had an opportunity to do a lot of thinking since all this happened, and there's a couple things that come to my mind. It appears to me that we ought to have a steering committee of some sort, made up of the entities, and Mayor, I think that's the direction you were headed in. Somebody from, or some 2 people from the Power Board, some 2 people, 3 people from the city, some 2 people, 3 people from Middle Tennessee Electric, that work in a steering committee form that can start to unwind all these questions that we have. And that steering committee could meet and work in public meetings and then report back to all of their groups where that is. So I'll throw that out as one of my first ideas.
Mayor, I think we're going down the right track here. You know, my question originally that I didn't present very well was, who do we go to for questions? Can I go to the Power Board? Can I go to Middle Tennessee Electric to answer questions? How is this going to work?
Yeah,
or am I going to submit my questions to you?
Well, I think we've got a number of options, and we didn't. This was the meeting to say let's all get together and start to begin the process. So, how we would go about doing that, I think, is absolutely vitally important, and it goes on the note I've heard from everybody today, and it's what I believe too. As these talks continue, we need to make sure we're continuing to give updates to the Murfreesboro Electric employees. That's going to have to be part of it. So we may want to give some thought to how do we look at developing the city's side of the memorandum of understanding to present to Middle Tennessee Electric to see how they view it. We're going to need to get our side in a place where we say these are the issues, this is what we would expect, with consultation with the Power Board, City Council, and others, to send to Middle Tennessee Electric to say this is what we found important. How do you respond? So a number of different options, and when we get to that point in time, Mr. Young, I think it'll be important that get communicated to everybody, Power Board and City Council. If we have one person asking a question over here and a different person asking somebody else a question, we're going to have a communication breakdown. We're going to have misinformation and bad information, and it's going to break down the process. So how we would centralize that to get collected and then centralized to sent back out to the stakeholders is going to be absolutely critical, or we will have some missteps.
Ms. McGinn, how would we do that?
Well, you have a couple of options, as Mr. Lyons said. I mean, I think it would be appropriate for the city and MED to work on their side to get the issues identified before there's any discussion or questions to Middle Tennessee. With respect, Steve, I don't think you start out with Middle Tennessee on the steering committee because you're going to be negotiating with them. So you get your side of the negotiations issues identified first, and having a committee of staff that for both that works together and then raises the issue to the Power Board and to the City Council, I think might be the most functional issue. And I think MED staff probably needs to take the initiative in developing the list because, as I said, they're the experts in electric utilities, so having perhaps a point person that the council would pick for the city and a point person the Power Board would pick for the Power Board to direct staff efforts to come up with the issues and then have a consolidated issue thing and figure out how do we go about getting the information on that. And I think once you've got a functional identification of issues, then you get with the lawyer to figure out, okay, what priorities are these legally, and who are we going to have be the experts? Is this something we want to research? Is this something we want to just ask Middle Tennessee? Would be one way to approach it. That I think would work. There are certainly others, but I don't think the identifying the inventory of issues is something that needs to happen at a formal meeting of the two boards with the Sunshine. I think that's primarily electric utility staff function that others will be able to add to. And if at this meeting perhaps the council wanted to say, Mr. Lyons is it for us, and the Power Board wanted to say who they wanted to be, I assume Steve, but I'm not going to speak for the Power Board. This is who we want to be coordinating the staff effort. Then they could start with that, and direct the two representatives to work together to identify the issues, because there certainly will be a gamut of them. You're going to need HR issues, and you're going to need electric system engineering issues, and you're going to need IT compatibility issues, and property analysis. What do we want to keep? What do we want to sell? I mean, the list will be a long one, I think.
Can I ask a question? Kind of piggybacking on what Mr. Shacklet said, and something that I think we're coming to the conclusion here is that, certainly one thing is that we're going to need a mechanism for everybody at the table to be able to bring any issues, questions, concerns. Somehow we need a mechanism to get that to the appropriate area. Doug was kind of asking, and I've got one that I just was one that popped into my mind, just as far as when you hire something. We say, kind of Bill was saying, it's you get into the details. Yeah, is that you say, well, nobody's gonna lose their job, kind of a thing. Well, no right business person or in their right mind would ever say nobody can ever lose their job that came over here from MED. So, is there some time frame on that? Those kinds of little details that say, well, it's easy to say, well, everybody's going to have a job, but, how long does that last? Certainly that can't be perpetual. How we need to have some sort of a mechanism to say, when I think of that in the middle of the night at 2 o'clock in the morning, can I just roll over and get my email out and send it where, so that I know it goes into the hopper with however this committee looks, the steering committee, however that gets formed. I would like for that, so the mechanism to be able to get those into the right place, and also then the mechanism which would be that group or whatever we end up with there to then communicate that effectively, I think are the two things that we need to sort of address. Sounds like what we need to address, at least a couple of the main things, until we start getting into the real details of this thing.
And Rob, I'll interrupt you a second. As we get into the details, we're in the electric business. We understand transformers and wires and poles and electrons and that whole process. I feel like, and this is the first time I've had a chance to sit with our board, I feel like there's an engineering function to this, as well as economics, as well as rates, as well as financial. And I'm going to have a conversation with our board when we meet to see if we can get an engineering firm working on the electric side of the piece, the evaluation of that, questions of maybe how these pieces go together, and transformer values, pole values, the whole plant. So I don't have an answer, but I want to bring that to this conversation, that we've got money and we've got expertise. We've got the ability to bring some technical folks to the table.
Could we have our professional staff here, Rob and Steve, would it be appropriate for us to say, let them identify the deal points so that we can get our hands around what we're talking about? Because I think right now it's hard to understand all of the complexities that we have to address. So if they would maybe within the next period of time, as soon as possible, get together and establish the deal points for this deal, engineering, rate, the financials, so that we have financials from both entities. So begin the employee relationship component. Identify the deal points and then we can make those public. And if we have further input to define a deal point that's not on the deal points, then we can further, go down that road a little bit farther. But I think right now we've got to find some way. It's like, buying a house or anything else. We got to get our hands around this thing, because I'm not sure we know what we're dealing with until we have the deal points for the deal.
And I think, great suggestion, Mr. Shacklin, and if we realize, and this is going to take months, and realizing there's going to be tons of those really fine layer details, that's going to take a long time. But I think if you gave Mr. Sachs and myself 2 to 3 weeks, we could come up with the global big picture ones, realizing, like, for instance, there's going to be HR issues. There may be 100 HR issues behind that. I don't know that we need to identify all 100 now, but if we globally said, here's some of the 3 to 5 biggest HR issues that are going to need to get addressed, technology, engineering, we could put those 2 lists together, and maybe that would be a point, as you all continue to get questions, that we can then merge those 2 lists together and say, now what does the list look like? Have we missed anything? And to do that publicly so others could weigh in on it as well. Kind of big picture, what are the major issues? Let's put the 2 lists together and see what that looks like, because that'll generate additional conversation and areas of emphasis and more importance. That may be easier for everybody to react to. Remember, this came to us unsolicited, so we're all in a spot to try to react, get caught up, and figure out how do we proceed forward. But that might be a way to get our arms around some of the bigger picture things and start taking them one by one to see how's the best way to address those.
So would it make sense for the Power Board to have Steve, for right now, work, and then on the council perspective, have Rob work together, and then come up with, what our course of action needs to be, and then that would be, since Mr. Lyons comes to some of the Power Board meetings, that Mr. Lyons would come to the Power Board meetings, because I think what we have to be careful with, that we don't have one group doing one thing and the other group doing the other thing. So I think, Steve, it's great to get an engineer look at it, but I also think that needs to be jointly talked about between the two, so we're not all doing something different. But would that be okay to do that? What's the thoughts of the Power Board?
Sounds good.
I think it's a great idea.
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay. All right, so what would be, Mr. Lyons, if you and Steve get together?
Maybe 3 weeks
I was going to say, do we want to set a date for a report back?
Let's say 3 weeks. I think we should be able to identify the bigger issues and develop a document that we can send to both bodies to get feedback, because there's a whole lot more that's going to need to be asked, but that'll give us a sense of the bigger items.
Could I ask for an agenda item for our board meeting in 2 weeks for an update as to the status of that? That'd be great. I think it'd be good for the group.
Could I suggest also that when we do this again, that we have a joint meeting again, so that we're, as we're processing the questions, that it's a joint meeting of the council and Power Board?
Sure.
Well, I know we have a time crunch. Before we adjourn, I've got to ask one thing that was in the communication that was sent to us. Susan mentioned capital expenditures, CapEx, as we're going through this process. I believe we have a deadline with TVA on a substation on Veterans Parkway. I want to make sure that Rob, you communicate with Steve specifically on that, because that's important to the growth of the city, whether we do or do not finalize this transaction one way or the other. I just want to make sure we don't miss that window with TVA, because I know it's a pretty important window with them. So
that's pretty much a set date.
Yeah, it has to be done by a certain time, or it has to wait another year or two. So.
All right, so Mr. Lyons, will you keep us updated when you two meet, and then we'll have a joint meeting for our next meeting, and coordinate that with the board and the city council?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And speaking of meetings, would we come back at some point and have another? I thought this was a very progressive and very open dialogue, and I appreciate everybody's comments. Would we come back at some point, a month from now, 2 months from now, and do this again, Mayor?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's what we're just talking about is let you two meet together and then come up with those points. It'll be talked about at the Power Board, and then come up with what the next meeting date would be. And, if Thursdays work, great. We don't have to do it at 5. We could do it at 6, but if that works. Okay.
Mayor, City Council, appreciate meeting with us, and I think we started a nice dialogue.
Okay.
I don't know whose idea it was to do this, but it was a great idea, and I appreciate the council. I appreciate the Murfreesboro Electric employees, and I think we have an obligation to do our due diligence in this process. So thank you all.
And I agree, and I hope Steve will echo. This was actually an idea that came out of a meeting a week ago Friday that about really impressing about how transparent everything needs to be, that there is no done deal, that this is just something that we have an obligation to look at, and that's what we'll continue to do. So, all right, I'm going to close or adjourn the City Council meeting, and then Mr. Scales, you'll adjourn the Power Board meeting. So the City Council special meeting will stand adjourned.
The Murfreesboro Power System Department adjourned.
All right. Thank you, everyone.